Welcome to Section 4, the last section of this Recruiting Academy course. We're going to be covering some sample recruiting processes with recommendations for improvement. So this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you get to use all the knowledge that you've gained through this course and hopefully be able to understand the recruiting processes that I'm going to go through. And hopefully, you already have a sense of what the student athlete should be doing as they walk through the process. And if you don't, by the end of all these sample recruiting processes, you have a pretty good sense of what things might happen to you along the way and how you can respond to them and best deal with them to get you the best possible outcomes. Welcome to Section 4. This is the final section of the Core Athletics Recruiting Academy. And in this section, we're going to do a deep dive into recruiting case studies. And I'm going to give a bunch of recommendations for improvement. So we have 4 recruiting case studies. And the first one is going to start with Jill. Now, each one of these recruits is an imaginary recruit. But every scenario that these recruits encounter are scenarios that people that I have recruited in my time as an Ivy League coach encountered. So these are real scenarios with imaginary people. So let's jump right into it. Case study, Jill. Jill's background. Jill has a 3.8 unweighted GPA and a 4.1 weighted GPA with a 1290 SAT. She lives outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and her parents are going to be helping pay for her college with a contribution of $15,000 per year. She meets some of the Ivy recruiting standards, but not all of them. So she's run 212 in the 800 meters her junior year, which is equivalent to 1190 in the 100 meter dash, 56.5 in the 400, a 457 mile, 5.5 high jump, 1810 in the long jump, 42 feet in the shot, or 135 feet in the javelin. So hopefully you compete in one of these events and you have a general sense of how good Jill is. So let's talk about the importance of early decision, because Jill is going to be an early decision applicant. Around 75% of Ivy League student athletes are accepted in the early decision process. It is easier to be admitted early decision than it is to be admitted regular decision, especially if you do not have a support slot. The early decision deadline for the Ivy League is November 1st, so try to be well underway with the recruiting process in the summer between your junior and senior year in order to hit that deadline. Now, plenty of recruits end up in the Ivy League through the regular decision process as well, but it is definitely easier to be admitted in the early decision process, especially if you will not be receiving a support slot from a university. If you are receiving a support slot, it's still easier during early decision because there are more slots available, but in certain scenarios, it can also be a good possibility to make it in regular decision, but it's always best to be ready for early and then use regular as a backup if you absolutely have to. Okay, so May of Jill's junior year. Jill meets the recruiting standards of a few Ivy League schools during her junior season. Pro tip. So think about your recruiting process like you're going to see this presentation. We're going to present this month by month, okay? And try to think about, what am I accomplishing this month in my recruiting process? What's going to happen this month? While she's hit the recruiting standards, and that means that's a great month, try to have as much action each month as you can as you're wrapping up your junior year. So I'm trying to say, get ahead and try to be proactive. Now, that doesn't mean spamming coaches with tons of emails, because that'll make you a nuisance. So there's a sweet spot here. You have to really determine what that sweet spot of being proactive and also not being a nuisance is. But try to be proactive and get on top of this stuff as early as you're able to. Now, June of Jill's junior year. One Ivy coach, we're going to use Columbia for this example, along with a few NESCAC schools and other D1 and D3 schools, reach out during the early summer before Jill's senior year. Pro tip, if one Ivy coach is interested, likely more will be as well. So we would recommend that you email all the schools that you're interested in with a quality introduction email to increase your chances. You can check out our templates that we have in our course download section, so you know exactly how to craft a great introductory email. The Columbia coach requests academic documents in late June for an admissions pre-read. The Columbia coach recommends not submitting the 1290 SAT as it actually lowers her AI. So the Columbia coach and Jill had a conversation. She told the Columbia coach that she had a 1290 SAT, and the Columbia coach said, "That's great. I'd recommend not submitting it because your actual AI is higher while calculating without the test score." And she begins the process of financial aid pre-read with Columbia. Now we're in July. It takes 3 weeks for Jill to finally submit all requested documents to the Columbia coach. Because remember, those admissions pre-read documents, there are a lot of them. Okay, so it took her 3 weeks to submit all the requested documents. By this time, it's late July. Pro tip: have all pre-read documents prepared in early June before your senior year, so this process is expedited. Admissions requests additional information from Jill before issuing a pre-read. So just because you've submitted all your documents doesn't mean that admissions is going to issue a pre-read right away, because you may have missed something or they may want further clarification on something. So this is another reason why it's so important to have this stuff ready ahead of time, because the process can be slowed down for a lot of different reasons. Moving on to August of Jill's senior year. Jill's Columbia Financial Aid pre-read comes back, and she's eligible for around $50,000 per year in financial aid, bringing her cost of attendance down to around $27,000 per year. Now, $50,000 a year in financial aid is right around the average amount of financial aid that those people who are eligible for financial aid will get. So that doesn't mean that the average applicant is going to get around $50,000. The average person who is eligible for aid is going to average around $50,000 a year of aid. So there are plenty of people that apply that are not eligible for financial aid because their parents or they make too much money. But for all of those who are eligible for financial aid, the average aid in the Ivy League is around $50,000, which would bring her cost of attendance down to around $27,000 per year at Columbia. A second Ivy, we're going to use Brown for this example, reaches out in August. The Columbia coach and Jill play phone tag, and it takes another 2 weeks to submit all requested documents to admissions. That's just following up on that admissions pre-read extra questions that the Columbia admissions office had. August continued. Pro tip: make it your goal to be the fastest person to respond to coaches, especially of the schools that you're most interested in. You would be really surprised how many athletes take days and even weeks to respond to coaches from schools that they're interested in. I supported athletes who responded quicker than similar athletes who responded more slowly for two reasons. Athletes that respond quickly and are easy to get through the process, I imagine they're likely going to be easier to have on my team. There are all kinds of random, annoying things that you have to get through as a college coach and that the student athletes have to get through. There's compliance, paperwork, and clearances. There are sports medicine clearances. There are all these different things that a student athlete has to do to stay eligible, not to mention staying on top of their grades so that they can stay academically eligible. And these people that respond very quickly through the process and make the process feel easy, a coach will imagine that those people will be on top of their things in college just like they are during the recruiting process. And that's really valuable. So be one of those people. Another reason that I ended up supporting student athletes who were quick and fast to respond is that coaches can sometimes have time urgency as well, just like the student athletes can. And sometimes the athlete who's furthest along in the process gets the slot. Now, that's not to say that a person who's not even close to any recruiting standards is going to get a bunch of slots because they're ahead of time. But if you're close to the recruiting standards or you meet recruiting standards, that is something that can really help separate you from athletes that are in a similar range to you athletically, is being the easiest one to work with through the process. Now, we're still in August here. August is a big month for Jill. Columbia Admissions Office requests that Jill change a class for her senior fall semester, but the school year has already begun and the high school denies the request for a schedule change. So, in this scenario, Jill did not have four core solids as perceived by the Columbia Admissions Department. And so they requested that she change a class to get up to the four core solids. But the school year was already underway, so she couldn't change the class. Now, Jill is also invited out for official visits at 5 schools in the fall: Lehigh, Williams, Northeastern, Columbia, and Brown. She begins the financial aid pre-read process with Brown. In September, the Columbia coach asks for a commitment the week after her official visit, which is before two of the other official visits that she has scheduled. So she's taken 2 visits, and she takes her third visit to Columbia. She still has 2 more visits scheduled, Lehigh and Brown. Those are in October. But the Columbia coach says, I need you to commit now. I'm offering you a slot, but I need to know if you want to come. Now, this is something that coaches oftentimes do. They'll put time pressure on you. And for an athlete like her, she meets the standard, their recruiting standards, but she doesn't blow them away. So the Columbia coach is thinking, if I'm the only Ivy, maybe since she doesn't have super high marks, if I'm the only Ivy offering her recruit slot, if I put some time pressure on her, maybe she's just going to go ahead and say, yes, I'll take the slot. And coaches oftentimes like to have a recruit already locked down early in the recruiting process. So the Columbia coach is taking a gamble here and putting some time pressure on Jill. Pro tip: try to schedule your official visits with your top school choices first. Okay. This is going to keep you from finding yourself in a situation where your second choice is giving you a deadline before you've even visited your top choice. So Columbia is giving her a deadline before she's visited Lehigh or Brown. So if Lehigh or Brown were schools that she would prefer to attend than Columbia, then she's in a pickle here because she either needs to turn down that slot or take the slot at Columbia, but not even get to go to the other schools that she likes more. Now, in this scenario, she's kind of likes them all the same until she sees them. So she's interested in all of them, but she would like to be able to see them all to make a really good decision for where she wants to go. Should she take the support slot at Columbia? Pros: it's in the Ivy League, it's Division One, and she gets a support slot, which will increase her chances of admission. Cons: she doesn't get to go on her official visits to Lehigh or Brown. While Columbia has been recruiting her longer, she's excited about the unique culture at Brown and likes the coach. She doesn't yet know if she will have a support slot at Brown. She is unsure about living in New York City for 4 years. She has always wanted to go to the Ivy League, but she has been talking to Lehigh about athletic scholarship, and they want to talk further in person on her official visit. Now, keep in mind, Jill's parents are going to help her with up to $15,000 per year. But in the financial aid pre-read, she got $50,000 in aid, which means that she's going to have to pay $27,000 a year to go to Brown. If her parents are helping her with $15,000, that still leaves her with a bill of $12,000 a year. And now multiply that by 4 years, and she's going to come out of college with $48,000 in student loans unless she works really hard over the summer or has a job while she's on campus, which most people who have financial aid are going to do those things. But either way, she's going to graduate with student loans. And if she was able to go to Lehigh and get some athletic scholarship and maybe even some academic scholarship, because places like Lehigh have that, maybe she can come out debt free. And that is a huge positive. So she'd really like to go on her visit to Lehigh to know if she likes it. Because if she loves it and she's going to get some athletic and academic scholarship, maybe she's just going to go there. So this whole not knowing is a real struggle, and it makes this decision challenging for her. While the support slot will help her chance of admission at Columbia, it is not guaranteed because her high school, remember, her high school denied her request to add rigor to her fall class schedule, which is something that the Columbia admissions office requested. The coach is telling her, the Columbia coach is telling Jill that she has a high chance of acceptance, but it all feels a little up in the air because there's still that loose end of not having been able to change that fall class, which is what Columbia asked for. She also does not yet have her financial aid pre-read or admissions pre-read back from Brown, so she's unsure of how the cost will compare and if she might have a better shot of being admitted to Brown. So even just if she just had a couple more weeks to decide and the Columbia coach didn't put this time urgency on her, she would have been able to maybe find out what athletic scholarship and academic aid she would be able to have at Lehigh. She'd be able to get her financial aid pre-read back from Brown, and she'd be able to take visits to both places. She'd also be able to get her admissions pre-read back from Brown, so she would know. And she's thinking, well, if I get my admissions pre-read and my financial aid pre-read back from Brown and those look good, then maybe I'd rather go to Brown because there's not this issue of Columbia asking for her to change that course in the fall semester, which she wasn't able to do. So September continued. Jill makes her decision and she ends up committing to Columbia because she's afraid of losing the support slot. Pro tip, this is a big one. Schedule your official visits as early as you can to decrease your chances of having decision timelines put on you by coaches. The closer you get to the early decision deadline of November 1st, the more likely you are to have a coach give you a deadline. The Columbia coach now reminds Jill to change her second semester class schedule to increase rigor in the spring semester. They also ask her guidance counselor to write a short statement explaining that by the time Jill asked to change her fall class schedule, it was too late to do so. Now we're into October. Her high school allows the spring schedule change. So now she has 4 academic solids in the spring, but she still only has 3 in the fall. Her Brown financial aid pre-read comes back just in time, and her cost of attendance is lower than Columbia by $1,500 per year. She does the right thing here, and she submits the financial aid pre-read to the Columbia coach for a match. The Columbia coach tells Jill that they have a limited number of matches and that the head coach doesn't let them use a match on an athlete that has already committed. One of the reasons they might do this is since you've already committed to that recruiting slot, they can look at that as if you have committed to those terms. And those terms include the financial aid pre-read that you've already gotten. So you were willing to commit when the price was this. Now, when you find out that the price is less somewhere else, that shouldn't make you decommit or want to change the terms. But pro tip, if a coach denies a price match with another Ivy, they are most likely playing games. It might be possible that they have a limited number of matches that they can do, and it is likely that they would prefer to not have to go through the process of price matching for someone who has already committed, because what they really want to use the price match for is to entice someone to commit. Once you've already committed, they would like to just get you through the process and get you admitted, and then they'll see you next year when you get there in the fall. But if it's important to you, don't back down, okay? The way you should handle this situation is to explain it in a couple of different ways, depending on what situation you're in financially. And here are my recommendations. If you are paying for college, then you can say, Coach, I understand the head coach says you don't do matches for committed athletes, but I'm already really worried about how much I'll need to take out in student loans, and my parents won't be helping me pay for school. So $6,000 over 4 years, that would be $1,500 per year more expensive at Columbia than Brown, is a ton of money for me. Can you try asking the head coach again? So that would be a good way of putting it. In Jill's case, she could say, well, my parents are going to help me with 15,000 per year, but it's going to cost me 27,000 to go. So if it was an extra $1,500 cheaper, then I would have to pay $6,000 less in student loans. Just explain to them your situation, because if you talk to them human to human, they'll usually understand and they'll usually give you what you want. The other way you can explain it would be, Coach, I understand that the head coach says you don't do matches for committed athletes, but my parents will be paying for my college, and they're saying that if Brown costs $6,000 less over 4 years, then I need to get a match if I'm going to go to Columbia. They've sacrificed so much for me. I'd hate to make them pay more than they have to. Can you try asking your head coach again? You'd be their hero if you could get the match. So if your parents are okay with it, blame it on them and say they're not going to spend an extra $6,000 on Columbia if Brown's going to be that much less. So try to explain it to them in a way that makes them want to do the work for you to get the match. October continued. Jill goes ahead and calls the coach's bluff and says that she is going to take her official visit to Brown since it will save her and her parents $6,000 over 4 years. The Columbia coach goes ahead, believe it or not, and speaks with the head coach, and the head coach gives in, offering to submit the Brown financial aid read for a match. Jill applies early decision to Columbia and alerts the coach when all application materials are submitted. The match comes back from financial aid, and the cost of attendance is still $300 per year more than Brown, but it's much closer. It was $1,500 more expensive. Now it's only $300 more expensive, because remember, the match will typically only match tuition, but each Ivy League school is going to calculate their fees and cost of living in slightly different ways. So it's still $300 more than Brown, but Jill decides to stick with Columbia despite the small price difference. The coach requests the admissions office review the application of the athlete and issue a likely letter. And 1 week later, the admissions office issues a likely letter. As long as Jill keeps up her grades and stays out of trouble, she'll be admitted with the rest of the accepted students in the early decision class. So that wraps up Jill's recruiting process. Hopefully, that was helpful in helping you understand what scenarios a recruit can encounter, what things Jill did really well, and what things Jill probably could have done a little bit better. All's well that ends well, and Jill ended up at Columbia. It would have been really nice if she got to check out Lehigh and Brown in order to be really sure that she made the right decision. But really, she ended up in a great place, and it's unlikely that she's not going to enjoy her time at Columbia.